Healing in PvP is about to receive the biggest nerf I think it has seen in a long time, and I don't think the community is ready for it. Essentially, since this game's inception, pretty much, a lot of players have had everything to say about the life school and healing in general. And, you know, since the Rochambeau has changed up everything and you have schools like Fire and Storm now, you know, kind of dual schooling on their cards, and, you know, some of them actually healing, a lot of people have had quite a bit of things to say about healing, especially since, you know, we lost our enchants, our damage enchants for cards. Critical has gotten completely changed in the past like decade. And then on top of that, you know, we don't have Solar Surge anymore. Wizards are just generally doing less damage in PvP overall, especially with, you know, the damage intersects and now the stat caps for pretty much every league of PvP. So healing has always been this sort of hot topic, but I think the nail that broke the camel's back definitely has to be this recent update that introduced level scaling. Basically, if you don't know, every stat in every league now has a cap, and basically the data that they use to create the stat caps happens to be based off gear that you can obtain through, you know, 50 through 59 for Master. And yes, it is 50 through 59. You can actually go up to 59 for the Master League. For Legendary, it's 60 through 69. For Premier, it is, well, this is the Max League, right? So 160, or I think it might actually be 150 through 159. I'm not too sure. And then the Exalted League, which is 100 through 109. So essentially the data pulls the maximum amount of stats that you can get from gear at those levels and then creates stat maximums. And some leagues have super busted gear that just never got audited. Case in point, Exalted gear, Darkmoor gear, right? And because of that, some leagues are actually able to get like really godlike stats. And it can be a good thing, it can be a bad thing, but this is the nail that broke the camel's back, specifically because a lot of Exalteds are able to reach really high stat caps that, say, Master League and Legendary League players cannot. And one of those stats happens to be outgoing, right? An Exalted can get probably like anywhere between like 30 and 40% outgoing in most leagues when scaled down. This was definitely going to cause a problem. So basically the heat was on and the devs got to talking, and this is what transpired on Ratbeard's stream on August the 11th.
If there's not a hot, if there's no overtime component on the heal and it's more than 2 pips, then we'll take it out and we'll see how things feel. So, but we won't need to touch outgoing. We'll leave outgoing alone. Although we will want to look at we'll want to rebalance and look at the stat maximums. But it's not a big nerf to outgoing. Looking at the math model, it looks like outgoing should be 0% in every league up to 100, and then in the max league it should be about 30%. I think. I'm speaking off the top of my head. It's just if HPP stays as high as it is, then outgoing would have to come way down.
So this is absolutely huge. So essentially what you guys just heard is that the devs are basically taking it to burst healing. This means that any card over 2 pips that has burst healing, such as, you know, I think Fairy is fine, Sprite is fine, right? But Dryad is about to be PvP banned. There is no overtime factor. Satyr, that is probably the biggest one. Unicorn as well. There is no overtime factor and it is over 2 pips. Unicorn will be banned. Satyr, everybody's and the life school's saving grace. Ice with life mastery, any school with life mastery will no longer be able to burst heal with Satyr. This is probably one of the biggest hits to healing in a long time. So what does this mean for healing overall, right? Is healing no longer viable? And what about people not using infections when an infection is supposed to be the main counter to healing? Well, for those of us that do PvP avidly, or if you have any friends that do PvP pretty avidly, anybody can tell you that infection doesn't really work. I would say probably about like 90% of the time, when, you know, it can always be taken off with a minor blessing and or a sprite or a fairy, which a lot of life's carry specifically to counter infection, and deck fails do happen. So if you aren't able to, you know, dangle an infection over somebody with a life mastery or a life main's head all the time, like 100% of the time, they are going to use a 4-pip spell that is pretty much going to, you know, in low level leagues at least, pretty much reset the match depending on how much outgoing they have. To me, there are so many cards with interesting mechanics like Imp that, you know, have the ability to hit for 1 pip, take off a shield, take off, you know, a weakness, and then activate, you know, the full healing potential of an overtime. And all of these spell elements are pretty much squandered because Satyr is just so good. So as soon as I heard this, you know, I instantly thought, well, people might try to run regenerate imp strats or possibly goat monk imp strats, or just straight up might just start healing with overtime heals in general. And I think that's healthier for the meta. Maybe, maybe not. In my opinion, I think it is, because it lets other spells thrive. And I think that Satyr, you know, being like the main heated pinpointed argument for like healing is fair, because it's so much healing for 4 pips already, and then you have outgoing stacked on top of it. And if you guys actually listen to the end of that clip where Ratbeard says this,
looking at the math model, it looks like outgoing should be 0% in every league up to 100, and then in the max league it should be about 30%. I think I'm speaking off the top of my head. It's just if HPP stays as high as it is, then outgoing would have to come way down.
At least what I'm gathering from this is that if Satyr ever does come back in the same capacity that it's currently allowable, like in the game at the making of this video anyway, that outgoing is going to be capped at 0. There is going to be no outgoing up until the 100 league, and then I think he says the Premier League or the max level league 160 is going to have a max of 30%. I don't really do a lot of max PvP, so I can't really weigh in on that. If anybody else does max PvP, specifically like life PvP or like any healing strategies, feel free to weigh in on that in the comment section below. But as for low level PvP, this is really good. I cannot tell you how many strats there are where people will drop damage or drop resist or drop crucial stats just to stall out by having a lot of outgoing granted by like crown gear, and just completely reset the match. And now that level scaling is out, and you know, exalteds or premiers can scale down to legendary and master and get some pretty crazy stats with a lot of outgoing, you know, with the pin system and a lot of the pre-patch, or I guess the legacy, I should say, Morganth gear giving like really crazy outgoing, and even some of the like Skyfarer pack, like rings, I think for life, give like amazing outgoing. These are causing major problems at Legend and Master for the matches that are going on, right? Because the new mouse divum spells are pretty much like frying all of low-level PvP, and nobody's doing it. But for the matches that were going on, this was an obvious problem. But as of right now, outgoing seems to be staying the way that it is. And I think the devs are just trying to maybe look at how they can rebalance burst healing, if at all. And if burst healing does come back, I think they are going to, you know, go ahead and implement the 0 outcoming for Master and Legendary, and then Premier and Exalted will have their own respective caps. But this is pretty much the time for a lot of healing strats to start, you know, incorporating Regenerate, Imp, you know, Goat Monk Imp, or I guess Guiding Light and other things to boost your outgoing, so that, you know, your overtime healing is just as good as your burst healing. But this time it's a lot more fair, because players can still pretty much counter it even if they don't have an infection on you. But this is pretty big and pretty significant, and I think a lot of people are going to have, you know, pretty passionate opinions on it. Just please try to keep your criticism constructive, you know what I mean? Don't just say like the game is dead, the game is dying, it's never going to come back. You know, that stuff tends to go in one ear not the other. But do let me know how you think this change is going to affect your respective league. And that is pretty much it for this video. Please like it, share around, because this is a pretty big change. And of course, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.